They thought I was just another quiet homeowner, the kind who paid dues on time and kept his head down. But the moment my 4-year-old niece was cornered at our neighborhood clubhouse, ordered to raise her arms for a so-called safety search, something inside me snapped. Her hands trembled, clutching her hoodie like a shield, while across the glass doors the HOA president Evelyn Hart watched with smug detachment. They didn't know who they were dealing with. For over a decade, I'd investigated civil rights violations, exposing how small rules could be twisted into weapons of control. And now, right here in Cedar Ridge Lakeside, I saw it happening again, this time to my own family. One flick of a camera, one nod of authority, and a child was about to be humiliated. That was the second she crossed the wrong man. Because what Evelyn didn't realize was that the very system she built, the sensors, the patrols, the rules, was about to become the evidence I used to bring her empire crashing down. Before we dive into the full story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. The air inside the Cedar Ridge Lakeside Clubhouse was unnervingly still, like the calm before a storm that nobody wanted to name. Maya stood beside me, her small frame tense, her hoodie drawn tight like she was bracing for winter even though it was late summer. A guard named Noah Briggs loomed in front of her, his latex gloves half pulled on the blue rubber snapping as he flexed his fingers. His eyes didn't quite meet mine. They stayed locked on her, as if waiting for permission to move forward with a command that had no business existing. Behind the glass check-in desk, HOA President Evelyn Hart barely tilted her head. She stood with arms folded, pearls gleaming under the recessed ceiling lights. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone carried the order, "Search the girl." And the way she lingered, chin raised slightly, you could tell this wasn't about safety, it was about control. "Step back," the guard repeated, his voice, sharp, professional, rehearsed. But he wasn't speaking to himself. He was warning me. I didn't step back. I raised my phone, pressed record, and said evenly, "You're about to violate the constitutional rights of a minor. You sure you want to do that on camera?" That one sentence cracked the silence like glass shattering. For the first time, Evelyn's eyes shifted. She looked directly at me, and in that glance I saw the flicker of recognition. She knew my background, or at least she suspected. She knew I wasn't just some anonymous uncle. But she smiled anyway, a cold, patient smile that told me she still believed the system was on her side. Maya's breathing was ragged. She wasn't crying, not yet, but I felt her hand slip toward my sleeve the way she had when she was 5 years old, crossing the street after her father, my brother, died in service. Sundays at the pool were supposed to be sacred, a fragile pocket of joy in a world that had already taken too much from her. And here in broad daylight, Evelyn had tried to strip that from her too. I leaned slightly closer to the guard, lowering my voice so only he and my recording device could catch it. "You lay one finger on her without probable cause, and that's unlawful detainment. You want to explain that to a judge, or should I just let this live stream to the neighborhood forum?" Noah froze. For a moment I saw the calculation flicker in his eyes, the tug of war between his orders and his conscience. His hand, still trapped in the limp glove, trembled slightly. Then he withdrew. The glove snapped back into place at his wrist, untouched. Maya exhaled hard, like someone who'd been underwater too long and suddenly surfaced. Evelyn finally stepped forward. "You're being difficult," she said flatly, her voice sharp enough to slice through the tense air. "No," I replied. "I'm protecting family." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't shout. Evelyn Hart never shouted. She gave commands like a queen, subtle, lethal, never raising her voice, because the world bent to it without question. "Escort them off clubhouse grounds," she said to Noah. "Their access is suspended until further review." Maya flinched. I placed my hand gently on her shoulder, steadying her. "Go ahead," I told Evelyn. "Add retaliation to the record. Helps establish motive." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Noah's face. His gaze darted from Maya's pale face to the blinking red light of my phone camera. His boots shifted uneasily against the tile floor, but he didn't move to grab us. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. She hated being disobeyed, even passively. We walked away first. Maya's grip on my sleeve tightened as we exited through the heavy double doors, our footsteps echoing down the polished hallway like gunshots. Outside the cul-de-sac felt different, colder somehow. The clubhouse lights behind us glowed like a watchtower instead of a community space. She clung to me until we reached our front porch. "Go inside, sweetheart," I said softly. "I'll be right there." Her eyes darted to the shadows around the cul-de-sac, scanning, as if expecting another ambush. When the door finally clicked shut behind her, I stayed on the porch staring back across the street at the clubhouse where Evelyn paced like a general inspecting conquered ground. She thought she'd won. She thought a flimsy suspension would scare me quiet. But she hadn't realized the landmine she'd stepped on. My brother had fought wars on foreign soil and been buried with a folded flag across his coffin. I had fought wars in courtrooms, shredding corporations and private contractors who thought they could bulldoze civil liberties with fine print and intimidation. Evelyn Hart had no idea what kind of war she'd just started. Inside, Maya retreated to the couch, headphones pressed tight, eyes vacant. She didn't speak a word for the rest of the evening. She didn't need to. Her silence screamed louder than any plea. I took out the violation notice they'd slipped under my door later that night, laminated, double-printed, citing Rule 14.3 interference with authorized security procedure. A $150 fine, immediate suspension of clubhouse privileges. The arrogance of it made me laugh bitter and sharp. They thought paper could bury truth. They thought procedure could excuse cruelty. I photographed the notice, archived it, and pinned it to the corkboard in my office. It wasn't just a bill. It was Exhibit A. Through my window, I could see the clubhouse glowing across the cul-de-sac, its porch lights burning bright like flood lamps in a prison yard. That building once symbolized community potlucks, holiday lights, kids racing to the pool in summer. But now to me it looked like a fortress of intimidation. A fortress Evelyn controlled. I wasn't afraid. Not for me. But for Maya, I was furious. She'd already lost too much. Her father, her sense of safety, her innocence. And now this place, our neighborhood, was trying to take even the little piece she had left. I wouldn't allow it. I pulled out my laptop and opened a blank file. Every war begins with a timeline. Every enemy exposes themselves through patterns. I'd fought this kind of battle before rulebooks weaponized power, concentrated fear, and forced. I knew how to dismantle it. They thought they could silence me with fines and suspensions. But what they didn't realize was that every laminated notice, every smirk across glass, every trembling glove was another nail in their coffin. And tomorrow I would start hammering. By the next morning, the sun rose over Cedar Ridge Lakeside with the same golden calm it always had, but the atmosphere inside my home was different. There was a heaviness, an unspoken weight that clung to the air like humidity. When I walked to the porch to grab the newspaper, a neatly laminated notice was already taped to my front door. The lettering was bold, printed on heavy cardstock, as though the authority of the words might increase if they were harder to tear. It read, "Violation of Rule 14.3 interference with authorized security procedure. Fine $150. Immediate suspension of clubhouse access." I laughed. A short, bitter sound that startled even me. They had wasted no time. Not even a full day after Evelyn's failed attempt to humiliate Maya, they had already crafted their retaliation. That notice wasn't about a fine, it was a warning shot. A reminder that the HOA wasn't just rules and meetings, it was Evelyn Hart's kingdom, and she had just declared me an enemy of the crown. I peeled the notice from the door, smoothed it flat, and carried it inside. Maya was curled on the couch, headphones on, pretending to watch cartoons. But her eyes weren't following the screen. They were glassy, distant, like she was somewhere else entirely. She hadn't said a single word since the incident. I didn't press her. Forcing her to talk would only etch the trauma deeper. Instead, I placed the notice on the kitchen table, photographed it, and filed it away in my binder. Exhibit B. A physical receipt of retaliation. In court, motive matters. And the timing of this fine was too convenient to ignore. Still, fury burned under my ribs. I wanted to storm across the cul-de-sac, slam the notice onto Evelyn's pristine desk, and ask her if she'd ever once read the city statutes she claimed to enforce. But I knew better. Retaliation and anger only strengthened their case. And I wasn't building anger. I was building evidence. That night, as twilight painted the lake orange and the clubhouse lights flickered on like the eyes of some great predator, I sat in my office staring at the glow through the blinds. Once that building had meant potlucks, game nights, late summer swims. Now it radiated something darker. Fear, intimidation, a checkpoint disguised as community. Maya's silence was worse than any fine. She used to chatter endlessly about school friends' books. But now she moved quietly, her oversized hoodie acting like armor against the world. She avoided the window that faced the clubhouse. She didn't even pack her purple dolphin towel, the one she'd always bring before pool days. It hung forgotten on the back of her bedroom door. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about Evelyn's power trip. It was about what she was stealing from the children in this community, their right to feel safe in their own neighborhood. Later that night, when Maya finally went to bed, I logged into the Cedar Ridge residence portal. Evelyn's fingerprints were everywhere, updates posted in her clipped tone policy reminders. Signed with her initials, subtle threats couched in language about safety. I scrolled until my eyes burned, noting dates, copying text, archiving every file, and then I posted. Not to Facebook, not to the public yet. I uploaded the short video clip I'd recorded of the incident to a private neighborhood watch forum. Just the clip, no commentary, no angry captions. I wanted reactions unfiltered by my words. Within 30 minutes, comments appeared. This happened to my daughter last month. Our nanny refuses to go near the clubhouse now. My son was searched for bringing a sketchbook. Every reply was another crack in Evelyn's facade. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was targeting children, always teens, always alone, and always when she was present. By noon the next day, 5 families had messaged me directly. 5 separate accounts, all echoing the same story. And with every new message, my binder thickened, my case grew sharper. Evelyn had been careful, no official votes, no community surveys, no city approval. Just laminated notices, vague memos, and whispered orders. But patterns don't lie. That afternoon, I walked the trail that connected my backyard to the clubhouse. It was quiet, the wood chips crunching under my boots, oak trees arching overhead, the so-called south entrance, Evelyn's favorite phrase. But I knew the truth. I had built that path 5 years ago when the HOA contracted me as a consultant to improve community access. It was public before Evelyn rebranded it security adjacent. Halfway down the trail, I stopped at the motion sensor mounted to an elm tree. Its weatherproof casing was rusting at the bottom, but the little red light still blinked faintly in the shade. I crouched, tracing the wiring, and a cold realization swept over me. This was my work, my code, my test firmware. 5 years ago, I had installed it for simple activity logging, tracking, nighttime trespassing near the utility shed. It wasn't designed to flag residents. It wasn't built to enforce policy. But someone had reprogrammed it. Someone had weaponized it. Back in my office, I pulled up my old developer archives, digging through dusty folders I hadn't touched in years. And there it was, the test tag, my signature, embedded in the firmware, still alive, still pinging. Every time that sensor blinked, it logged data under my original developer ID. Evelyn hadn't replaced the system, she had hijacked it. I sat back in my chair, a slow fire building in my chest. Evelyn thought she was untouchable. But in her arrogance, she had overlooked the most dangerous thing of all: the man who built the system she was abusing. Maya came downstairs just as I shut my laptop. She glanced toward the window, her eyes briefly meeting the clubhouse lights across the cul-de-sac. "Are they watching us right now?" she whispered. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Not for long. Because if Evelyn wanted a war, she had just declared it on the wrong man. The clip I had posted the night before had begun to ripple through Cedar Ridge faster than I expected. By breakfast, the anonymous forum thread had already ballooned with comments, most of them cautious at first, but all of them tinged with the same quiet anger. People had recognized what they saw in the 20-second video: Evelyn Hart's silent nod, the guard's gloves, the way Maya froze like prey under a spotlight. It wasn't just us, it had happened before. I scrolled through the replies, each one tightening the knot in my stomach. My son was stopped with his basketball bag. They said he needed ID, even though he was headed home. Another: our babysitter won't take the kids to the clubhouse anymore. She said she was interrogated about her residency. One more: my daughter's sketchpad was searched. They told her it was a safety risk. Always children, always teens, always when Evelyn was there. I knew patterns. For years, I had built civil rights cases on less than this subtle discrimination hidden under the guise of policy enforcement. The principle was always the same: you don't start with malice, you start with a rule. A small, seemingly harmless rule. Then someone with authority bends it, weaponizes it, and repeats it until people mistake fear for normal. That was exactly what Evelyn was doing. Around mid-morning, I stepped outside, partly to clear my head, partly to gauge the mood of the neighborhood. Sharon, who lived 2 streets over, was watering her begonias. She looked up when she saw me and glanced nervously toward the clubhouse. "You're not the first," she whispered, "but you might be the first who fights back." "When did it start?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "About a year ago. After the graffiti incident on the maintenance shed, she used it as an excuse, pushed for tighter checks, ID cards, patrols. At first, people went along. Who doesn't want safety, right? But it wasn't about safety. Not really." I could tell she wanted to say more, but her eyes flicked back toward the clubhouse. "Be careful," she added. "She retaliates quietly." I thanked her and walked on. Retaliation in silence. That was Evelyn's style. But silence also leaves traces. And I was going to dig them up. That evening, I logged back into the HOA portal. It was Evelyn's playground, neatly formatted: updates, rule amendments, violation reports. Her assistant uploaded everything, no doubt thinking it looked official. But what they hadn't realized was that every timestamp, every fine, every notice left a trail. And trails are what I hunted. I downloaded months of records and spread them across my desk. Violation after violation, each one vague but strangely consistent. Guest without ID. Unauthorized entry from South Trail. Failure to check in. What stood out was the demographic. Teenagers, babysitters. Children. Never board members' kids. Never Evelyn's friends. Always the powerless. I started mapping it out, pinning slips of paper to my corkboard with red thread linking them together. Maya's name at the center, but surrounded by a growing web. The Peterson boy stopped after basketball practice. Sharon's daughter with her soccer bag, the nanny accused of trespassing. Different incidents, same target profile. The pattern was undeniable. Still, I needed more than anecdotes. I needed proof of intent. Why these kids at these times in these places? That's when my eyes drifted to the laminated fine, still taped above my desk. Unauthorized entry from South Trail. I remembered Evelyn's smug use of the term South Entrance. But I knew better. That wasn't a security gate. It was a walking path. My path. I had built it 5 years earlier when the HOA contracted me to improve access to the clubhouse. Back then, it had been about community connecting the cul-de-sac to the pool deck. I'd installed a small motion sensor on the elm tree to track nighttime trespassing near the maintenance lot. A temporary solution. Nothing more. The realization hit me like ice water. Evelyn had taken my work and twisted it into a weapon. That night, I returned to the trail with a flashlight. The casing of the sensor was rusting at the bottom, but the faint red blink was still there, alive and unrepentant. I crouched down, running my fingers along the wiring, and a bitter laugh escaped my throat. I knew every inch of this device because I had installed it, and I had left a signature. Back home, I dusted off an old hard drive and pulled up my archive files. Buried in the code was the developer tag, a unique identifier I'd built into the firmware. It had never been erased, which meant every log, every false trigger, every misuse of that sensor still carried my mark. I connected to the sandbox I'd once used during installation. To my astonishment, the logs were still syncing. 37 triggers in the last 6 weeks. I scanned the list, and my stomach twisted. The afternoon of Maya's incident, 3 other residents had walked through that trail within 15 minutes, a jogger, a mother with a stroller, a boy on a bike. None of them were flagged. But Maya was. This wasn't malfunction. This was selective enforcement. Evelyn had cherry-picked the data to target whoever she wanted. By midnight, I had compiled the logs into a timeline and cross-referenced them with the violation notices. The alignment was brutal in its precision. The HOA's own records betrayed them. Evelyn wasn't just abusing policy. She was using illegal surveillance data to harass children. I sat back in my chair, staring at the corkboard now covered in red ink and pinned reports. My fury had cooled into something sharper. This wasn't about one laminated fine or one frightened teenager. This was about a system hijacked by a woman who thrived on fear. And now I had the receipts. Maya tiptoed into the room, rubbing her eyes. She saw the papers, the glowing screen, the corkboard web of evidence. "Are you building a case?" she asked softly. "Yes," I told her. "For you, for everyone." Her lips pressed into a small, determined line. "Then don't stop." And I wouldn't. Because Evelyn had built her empire on silence. And the only way to break silence is with truth. Loud, undeniable truth. Tomorrow I would take the first step in exposing her, and when the cracks started to spread, her entire kingdom would fall. The knock on my door came just as the sun was bleeding into the horizon, painting Cedar Ridge in the kind of light that makes every shadow look suspicious. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. But then came the second knock, firm, clip, the kind of knock that carried weight. When I opened the door, there stood Noah Briggs, the same guard who had once loomed over Maya with those gloves. Only now he looked different. His shoulders slumped, his jaw-tight eyes flicking nervously up and down the street. He wasn't here as a guard tonight. He was here as a man carrying a burden. In his hand, a thick manila envelope creased from the grip of his trembling fingers. "I can't keep this," he muttered, voice rough. "She asked me to do things that weren't right. I should have walked, but I didn't." I stepped aside, silently inviting him in. He hesitated before crossing the threshold, as though he feared Evelyn herself might leap from the shadows to drag him back. We sat in the front room, the faint sound of Maya's music drifting down from upstairs. I offered him coffee. He shook his head. His hands never left the envelope. She calls it safety, Noah said finally. But it's about obedience. Always has been. Orders given in private, no paper trail. Enough wiggle room to keep her untouchable. That day with your niece, she told me to do a precautionary scan. Said the girl matched a previous unauthorized entry. Matched how I pressed. He let out a bitter laugh. Didn't say. Just told me, alerts don't lie. But they do, don't they? They lie when someone programs them to. That was my opening. You hesitated, I reminded him. His eyes met mine haunted. I did. He slid the envelope across the table like it was radioactive. These are the real logs, not the sanitized junk they publish. And my body cam footage from that day. Unedited. You'll want to see it. I opened the flap and felt the weight of the truth spill into my lap. First came the reports, not the tidy PDFs posted online, but raw incident sheets. Noah's handwriting sprawled across margins, Evelyn's initials scrawled with smug confidence. Words leapt off the page: non-compliant youth, visible attitude, precautionary scan. Never evidence, just innuendo weaponized into policy. And then I saw it, the small black USB drive. My chest tightened. This is your cam, he nodded. Not HOA issued. My own. I don't trust who I work for. I plugged it into my laptop. The footage crackled to life, and suddenly, I was back in that moment, only this time through Noah's eyes. I saw Maya clutching her hoodie, the tremor in her small hands. I heard my own voice firm and steady, cutting through the tension. And then the camera shifted just enough to capture Evelyn through the glass. Her eyes cold, her lips pressed into that smug smile, her chin dipping the slightest fraction. The nod, the unspoken order. Seconds later, Noah's own voice filled the room. On second thought, we'll hold off for now. I froze the frame. There it was. Intent, order, hesitation, proof. I turned to him. Do you realize what this means? His shoulders sagged. It means she'll bury me if this gets out. No, I said quietly. It means she can't bury anyone anymore. For the first time that night, something flickered in his eyes. Not relief, not quite courage, just the faintest hint of release, like he had been carrying this weight for too long. He stood glancing toward the stairs, where Maya's music still drifted faintly. You're not the first person she's tangled with, he said, but you might be the first she's afraid of. I frowned. Why's that? Because you're not doing this for yourself. You're doing it for her. He nodded toward the ceiling. The words hit harder than I expected. He was right. Every late night scouring logs, every red string pinned to the corkboard, it wasn't about proving I was smarter than Evelyn. It was about protecting the one child left in my care from a world already too cruel. Noah left without another word. I stood at the door long after it closed, the envelope clutched to my chest like it might vanish if I let go. Upstairs, Maya's footsteps creaked softly. Was that someone for me? She asked. No, I called back. Someone for both of us. Later in my office, I watched the footage again. Slower this time. Evelyn's nod burned into my brain. Noah's hesitation carried weight. And Maya's flinch, that tiny moment where her body froze under imagined hands, seared itself into my memory. For years, Evelyn had thrived in the dark, giving orders no one could prove, silencing those who questioned her with laminated fines and threats of suspension. But silence doesn't last forever. All it takes is one fracture, inside, one witness, willing to hesitate, one camera that doesn't blink. Now I had them all. I slipped the drive back into the envelope and locked it in my safe with the sensor logs and violation notices. 3 locks, 2 backups, 1 goal. This wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a weapon. And soon I would aim it at the heart of Evelyn Hart's reign. The clubhouse lights glowed across the cul-de-sac, steady and smug. But tonight, for the first time, they didn't look like beacons of control. They looked like spotlights. And soon they would shine on every crack she'd tried so hard to hide. Friday loomed closer, and with it the sense that everything I had been building was about to ignite. The envelope from Noah sat locked in my safe, but its weight pressed on me even when I wasn't holding it. Every night I opened the body cam footage again, playing it frame by frame, studying Evelyn's nod, replaying the second Noah's voice, cracked when he said, "On second thought, we'll hold off for now." That hesitation wasn't weakness, it was the first splinter in her wall. And splinters grow. Still, evidence doesn't topple an empire on its own. It needs light. It needs exposure. So I sat in my office with 3 screens humming. On the first, the raw logs from my old developer tags still syncing like a heartbeat. On the second, the incident reports, each one inked with Evelyn's initials, each one vague enough to dodge accountability but precise enough to reveal a pattern. On the third, a blank timeline waiting for me to stitch the pieces into something undeniable. I started with the footage. I cut it clean, splitting the screen. On the left, Maya's terrified stance, her hands clutched to her hoodie like armor. On the right, Evelyn inside the clubhouse, her subtle nod captured perfectly by Noah's body cam. I added the log overlay at the bottom, 2:14 p.m., unauthorized entry detected, South Trail sensor. The evidence aligned like a puzzle, cause-effect intent. Slide 2, a photograph I had taken of the sensor itself mounted to the elm tree. I measured it again to be certain, 11 feet 4 inches from the curb. Overlaid beneath it, clause 11, 2B, from the municipal audit surveillance devices within 15 feet of public access cannot be used to issue disciplinary action. Highlighted in crimson, the words glared like an indictment. Slide 3, the raw incident logs Noah gave me unedited. Each sheet scrawled with phrases that reeked of bias, visible attitude, youth, non-compliant, precautionary scan requested. The handwriting changed, the ink varied, but the initials were always the same, E.H., Evelyn Hart's mark of approval. By the time I finished, the deck ran just under 6 minutes. Cold, factual, stripped of anger, but loaded with precision. I knew from experience that outrage fades, but precision sticks. Now came the question of delivery. I wasn't naive enough to think one HOA board meeting would change anything. Evelyn had spent years fortifying herself with allies, silencing dissent with fines and suspensions. I needed something bigger. I thought of Jess Ellery, the investigative reporter who had built her reputation exposing corruption in places that thought they were too small for the spotlight. Years ago, I had worked with her on a case involving a private contractor that abused migrant workers. Jess didn't chase gossip. She chased blood in the water. And Evelyn was bleeding. She just didn't know it yet. I drafted an email. Jess, a gated community in Cedar Ridge, is weaponizing unauthorized surveillance tech against minors. Attached is a verified timeline, raw logs, and body cam footage. The developer ID is mine. I never authorized enforcement use. If you want the exclusive, call me tonight. Her reply came within minutes. This is sharp. If you're ready to go on record, I'll take it. Send me everything. That was my first confirmation. I wasn't tilting at windmills. This wasn't paranoia scribbled on a corkboard. This was a story with teeth. Still, I didn't trust airtime alone. Media could be clipped, edited, spun. Evelyn had friends, and fear was still her greatest ally. So I built redundancy. I designed a website, simple, stark, password protected. Inside the full 6-minute deck, the logs, the code snippet with my developer tag, the municipal clause highlighted. Evidence too clean to dismiss. Then I printed 20 flyers, each one carrying a QR code linked to the site. My plan was simple. Friday morning, those flyers would appear in the mail slots of residents closest to the clubhouse, the very people Evelyn had kept closest to her. No names, no accusations, just a question printed in bold. Is this how your neighborhood protects you? That way, when Jess's segment aired that night, residents wouldn't just see a story on TV. They would hold the evidence in their own hands. Evelyn couldn't wave it away as gossip when the truth lived in their mailboxes. At 2 a.m, I leaned back from the glow of the screens, exhausted but steady. Everything was duplicated. 2 encrypted clouds, 1 hard drive under the floorboards, 1 locked in the safe. Preparation wasn't paranoia, it was survival. I had spent too many years in courtrooms, watching cases collapse, because evidence mysteriously disappeared. Not this time. I stood, walked to the porch, and looked across the cul-de-sac. The clubhouse lights glared pale against the dark, steady as always. To anyone else, they looked like safety. To me, they looked like a stage, the spotlights already waiting for their reluctant star. Evelyn believed those lights made her untouchable. Soon they would make her visible. When I came back inside, Maya was awake, sketching quietly at the kitchen table. She looked up at me, pencil hovering above the page. "Did you fix it?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Not yet," I said, resting a hand on her shoulder. "But we've started." She gave a small nod, then lowered her eyes back to her drawing. On the paper, I saw what she had sketched, a small figure standing firm against a towering shadow, a faint red dot glowing above. My throat tightened, but I didn't say a word. She didn't need me to, because even she knew Friday was coming. And with it, the reckoning. Friday afternoon arrived like a storm that everyone could feel, but no one wanted to name. By 3 o'clock, the clubhouse, that usually echoed with the splashes of kids at the pool or the hum of quiet meetings, was packed wall to wall. Folding chairs lined every inch of the main room, neighbors pressed shoulder to shoulder, some clutching their phones, others crossing their arms in nervous silence. The air buzzed with the restless energy of a crowd that knew something was about to snap. At the front, behind a long table meant for board members, sat Vice President Glenn Parnell. His expression was tight, his thinning hair plastered to his forehead with sweat he didn't bother to wipe. To his right sat two other board members who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. And one chair, Evelyn Hart's chair, sat empty. For a moment, I wondered if she had decided not to face this. But I knew Evelyn too well. She wasn't the type to slink away. She was the type to arrive late, calculated to make the room pivot when she walked in. Glenn tapped the microphone, clearing his throat. This emergency session of the Cedar Ridge HOA is now in order. We are here to address the allegations raised in last night's Community Watch segment. A voice from the back cut him off. Too late for that. Murmurs rippled through the room. I stood before I had fully decided to. Silence creates a vacuum, and if you don't fill it, someone else will. I walked to the microphone. Dozens of eyes tracked me, some wary, some hopeful. My name is Ethan Cole, lot 118. I began, my voice steady. You've all seen the footage. Some of you have lived it. My niece, 14 years old, was nearly searched without cause by a man following an order from that empty chair. I pointed toward Evelyn's seat. An order that was never written, never voted on, never legal. A few heads dropped. Others nodded. I held up a flash drive. This drive contains more than just the clip you saw on TV. It contains body cam footage, raw incident logs, and the original sensor data Evelyn used to justify her so-called precautionary scans. Data that came from a device placed 11 feet from public land. Data that by law cannot be used to discipline residents. I handed the drive to Glenn. His fingers twitched as he plugged it into the projector. The screen flickered to life. The room fell silent as the footage played split screen, my phone's recording on one side, Noah's body cam on the other. There was Evelyn visible through the clubhouse window, giving her subtle nod. Then Noah's voice. On second thought, we'll hold off for now. Gasps swept the room. Someone muttered, she really did it. Before the footage ended, the rear doors opened, and there she was. Evelyn Hart, pearls gleaming black slacks pressed sharp enough to cut walking with the calm of someone who believed she still owned the room. She slid into her chair without acknowledgement, folding her hands neatly on the table as if nothing had changed. The screen froze on her nod. All eyes turned toward her. Everything I implemented was for the safety of this community, she said smoothly, her voice slicing through the tension. A woman stood up from the second row. Safety. My daughter was 12 when she was searched for carrying a soccer bag. Was that safety too? Evelyn's face didn't flinch. We have protocols. No, I said, stepping closer to the mic. You had a system. A shadow rule book no one consented to. You used my code, my installation without authority, and you used it to target children. Glenn projected the logs onto the screen. Each one bore Evelyn's initials, each one vague, damning in its repetition. The crowd stirred, voices rising. My son was written up for not showing ID, someone shouted. They searched my nanny, another added. Enough, Glenn said, raising a hand. His voice trembled, but he pressed forward. As acting vice president, I moved to a vote. By HOA bylaws, a majority resident vote with board concurrence can revoke the presidency effective immediately. I second, came a voice from the back, then another I third. The room erupted in a wave of raised hands. It happened faster than Evelyn could react. Glenn turned to her. By the authority vested in this board, your presidency is revoked. For the first time since I'd known her, Evelyn's mask slipped. Her lips parted, but no words came. She gathered her clipboard, rose, and walked out without a sound. The doors shut behind her like the closing of a vault. The room exhaled. Relief, disbelief, even joy. Some clapped, others wept quietly. Children peered around their parents' legs wide-eyed, as if sensing they had just witnessed something historic. The vote was done. The fortress had fallen. That night, for the first time in months, the clubhouse lights went dark. No patrol cars, no clipboards, no laminated fines taped to doors. Just silence, the good kind, the kind that meant safety was returning. From my porch, I watched Maya step out into the cool evening air. She looked across the cul-de-sac at the darkened clubhouse, then up at me. Is it over? She asked. Not over, I said, but different, better. And for the first time since that awful day, she smiled. The morning after Evelyn Hart walked out of that clubhouse, the neighborhood felt transformed. Not fixed, not healed, but lighter, like a long-held breath had finally been released. For months, people had moved through Cedar Ridge with their shoulders, hunched eyes lowered whenever they passed the clubhouse porch lights. Now those lights were off, and the silence outside wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of relief. Maya was the first to notice. She stepped onto the porch, still clutching her sketchbook, her hoodie loose for the first time in days. She looked across the cul-de-sac at the empty clubhouse. It's not blinking anymore, she said softly. I followed her gaze and saw the elm tree sensor. The casing was still there, rusting in the morning sun, but the faint red glow was gone. The board had already voted to remove every undisclosed surveillance device. The thing that had once turned a child into a suspect was now just dead plastic. We walked together toward the pool deck, her dolphin towel slung casually over her shoulder. For the first time since the incident, she didn't keep her eyes fixed on the ground. She didn't clutch my sleeve like we were crossing enemy lines. Her steps were steady, her breathing even. When we reached the gate, she paused, waiting. "Can we go in?" "Yes," I said. "It's yours as much as anyone's." Inside, the pool sparkled under the morning light. A few kids were already splashing, their laughter bouncing off the water like music we hadn't heard in too long. Parents lounged in chairs without glancing nervously toward the office windows. The laminated signs, once plastered everywhere, with threats of fines and suspensions, had been torn down. In their place, a single handwritten note on the bulletin board: "Community meeting transparency first." Glenn Parnell approached his sleeves, rolled up sweat staining his collar. He looked exhausted but lighter, like someone carrying responsibility rather than fear. "Wanted to say thank you," he told me, extending his hand. "You gave us the reason to look again." I shook it firm. "I gave you proof. You chose to act." He nodded. "We're scheduling a third-party audit. Residents will vote on any future security measures. No more hidden policies." Maya dipped her toes into the water, her towel bunched beside her. For a long moment, she just sat there staring at the ripples, then finally swung her legs in with a splash. Her laughter followed, light and tentative but real. I stayed on the edge, watching her reclaim a space that had been stolen. The clubhouse, once a symbol of Evelyn's reign, was becoming something new, not yet whole, but no longer poisoned. Word of what happened spread fast. Jess Ellery's segment had been clipped, shared online, dissected by watchdog groups. Parents in other HOAs reached out to her, recognizing their own stories in ours. Within days, county officials were forced to review surveillance policies across multiple developments. The code I had once written, the censor firmware Evelyn had twisted, was flagged and stripped from enforcement use in 3 districts. But what mattered most wasn't the headlines or the policies. It was the little things. Maya unpacking her swim bag again without hesitation. Sharon's daughter riding her bike past the clubhouse without looking over her shoulder. Neighbors talking openly in driveways instead of whispering behind hedges. The sound of relief settling into ordinary life. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned the lake into molten gold, Maya sat beside me on the porch. She leaned her head against my arm, quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "I thought it would never stop." "It always stops," I told her. "But only if someone stands up." She nodded, thoughtful, then returned to her sketchbook. This time, instead of drawing shadows and red blinking dots, she sketched the pool deck, kids laughing, water splashing, her dolphin towel spread like a flag. Evelyn Hart hadn't disappeared completely. People like her rarely do. Rumors swirled of her trying to regroup, whispering about appeals and allies on other boards. But for now, she was gone, and Cedar Ridge was different. The fear she built had cracked, and once fear breaks, it's hard to rebuild. As I watched Maya's pencil trace brighter lines across the page, I realized this wasn't just a victory over one woman. It was a lesson etched into the bones of our community: rules mean nothing if they aren't questioned, and silence only serves the powerful. We had stopped being silent, and that was enough. Life has a way of testing the boundaries of courage. For me, it came in the form of a child standing frozen under the weight of authority she never deserved. For months, Evelyn Hart controlled this neighborhood with silence, threats disguised as policies, nods disguised as law. But silence can be shattered and fear can be unmasked. The lesson is simple: never assume small injustices are harmless. They grow, they spread, until someone says no more. To every parent, every neighbor, every viewer hearing this story, your voice matters more than you think. Speak up when others are afraid. Protect the spaces where children should feel safe. And remember, power built on silence only lasts until the first crack. If this story struck, you share your own below. Tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe if you believe truth deserves a voice louder than fear. Together, we can make sure the next Evelyn doesn't get to blink her red light unchecked.